South Asia has traditionally alternated between imperial order and warring states. For much of the region's history, warring states have proliferated, while for relatively brief interludes, imperial regimes have been able to exercise supreme hegemony, if not always direct territorial control. The territories that came to comprise Pakistan were the historic, geographic and demographic peripheries of South Asia, and had gradually been brought under British paramount suzerainty between 1757 and 1858. West Pakistan, as modern-day Pakistan, was known upon independence in 1947, to distinguish it from East Pakistan, which subsequently seceded to become the independent state of Bangladesh, was carved out of the turbulent frontier marches of the Raj, large parts of which were never fully pacified and were perceived as vulnerable to foreign invasion and subversion. These fears were not idle fantasies, as between 1000 CE and 1800, at least 70 major invasions of the Trans-Indus region had taken place, as well as innumerable smaller raids and rebellions. The British had annexed some of these territories late in their imperial expansion, Sindh 1843, Punjab 1849, and ruled much of the territory by reaching settlements with local potentates. At the opposite end of the Raj, as the British Empire in India was colloquially known, was East Bengal, which served as an impoverished rural hinterland that furnished Calcutta, now Kolkata, with raw materials, and British India, with its greatest monuments to imperial callousness, particularly the Great Bengal famines that heralded the onset and sunset of the Raj, 1769-70, 1943-44. Throughout South Asian imperial history, keeping control of Bengal and its teeming population had been a major concern for those invested in the maintenance of paramount power. The British also found retaining control of Bengal a great challenge, and it was from there that both Indian composite nationalism and Muslim nationalism would emerge. From the Muslim nationalist perspective, the British had succeeded the Mughal dynasty, and the administrative and political unity imposed by the colonial Raj ought not to be confused with national unity. The end of the Raj would require a transfer of power to the regions marked by communal majorities, either in the form of a loose confederation, the so-called Cabinet Mission Plan proposed by a delegation sent to India by the British government in 1946, which proposed the maintenance of Indian unity upon independence, or in the form of two or more independent states, whereby the Muslim majority areas would constitute Pakistan. The demand for Pakistan received overwhelming support in the 1946 elections, which saw the All India Muslim League carry more than 80% of the Muslim vote. When the Indian National Congress reneged on its commitment to the Cabinet Mission Plan, the Muslim League resorted to direct action in Calcutta, triggering the opening scene of large-scale communal violence that escalated by mid-1947 into a people's war of imperial succession, compelling the British to partition and quit sooner rather than later. The emergence of Pakistan thus unfolded in a manner different from most other cases of decolonization, where an existing colony changed status and rulers. In Pakistan's case, the maps had to be redrawn in light of communal and electoral realities. A massive exchange of population estimated at 14 individuals took place, and the new state was plunged into diplomatic and military conflict with its Indian counterpart almost immediately after independence from the UK was achieved on the 14th of August 1947. For Pakistan, nearly every aspect of statehood and society had to be set up from scratch. Karachi was made the temporary capital of Pakistan. Civil and military personnel who had sworn allegiance to the new state of Pakistan and forsworn loyalty to India were evacuated by land, air and sea as quickly as possible, and military preparedness was made a priority. The expectation that Pakistan might collapse under the strain appeared reasonable, given that in 1947 there were only several dozen Muslim civil servants in the All India services who opted to serve Pakistan, and only around 600 Muslim military officers, of whom only a handful were of any seniority. Fewer than 50 civil servants were believed to have had experience at policy-making levels. This small cohort of administrative officers had to run a country divided into two wings, separated by 1,600 kilometers of Indian territory. Furthermore, a dispute arose with dividing the financial assets and foreign debt, which was resolved only at the insistence of India's independence leader, Mahatma Gandhi, who overruled independent India's first premier, Jawaharlal Nehru, who had wanted to resolve the Kashmir question before awarding Pakistan any funds, lest it be used to purchase armaments to be used against India. In addition, India did not give Pakistan its allocated share of military equipment that had been earmarked for the newly formed Pakistani armed forces. The scale of the communal disturbances was greater for Pakistan than for India. Some 6M non-Muslims left West Pakistan with a population of some 30 in 1947, while 7 Muslim refugees sought sanctuary in the new state, having fled from India during 1947-48. Those who left West Pakistan represented many members of the business elite and middle class, which was drawn from the Hindu and Sikh communities, while those who came to Pakistan were by and large uneducated peasants. The outbreak of armed conflict with India from October 1947 over the disposal of the princely state of Jammu and Kashmir, combined with profound frustration with the Boundary Commission Award for Punjab, which resulted in major irrigation headworks used by Pakistan falling under Indian control on the other side of the border, meant that Pakistan's founders felt besieged on all sides and had only hard choices to make, which in turn would help set Pakistan's historical trajectory and undermine smooth development into a successful state. The overriding priority was building the armed forces, developing military infrastructure along the border with India, and administrative consolidation. Muhammad Ali Jinnah and Liaquat Ali Khan, the founding Governor-General and Prime Minister respectively, adopted a state-building strategy centered on allocating 2/3 of Pakistan's budgetary resources to the military. These resources were generated by the centralization of revenue collection in 1948 and by use of the Rs 550m worth of abandoned property left by fleeing non-Muslims. In order to dispense with the British presence in the armed forces, the government opted for rapid nationalization of the military, which aimed to replace all British Army officers retained after 1947 with Pakistani ones by January 1951. The Premier chaired the Defence Committee of Cabinet, held the defence portfolio, and personally handled the appointments and promotions of military officers under the nationalization policy. The heavy resource allocations would swiftly turn the military into Pakistan's most formidable institution, while the policy of rapidly promoting Pakistanis to senior positions would lead to the collapse of the British Indian policy of insulation of the army from politics, leading to the Rawalpindi conspiracy of 1951, the first, albeit unsuccessful, attempt at a military coup. However, building up the military was not going to be sustainable without economic growth and industrialization. The new country, ignoring the views of its British financial advisor, moved swiftly to develop a policy framework for industrialization and systematically redeployed the assets left behind by Hindu and Sikh businessmen and landlords to kickstart economic development and create a specifically Pakistani commercial class. This was accompanied by the commencement of Central Economic Planning in 1948, and by the following year, some 200 federally funded projects were at different stages of approval and implementation. The basic approach adopted was that the state would furnish capital and incentives to help develop the private sector, which would lead the economic growth process, in contrast to the socialist approach adopted by neighboring India. A critical aspect of the Pakistani economic growth policy was that it did not seek to bring about land reforms in West Pakistan, but rather sought to co-opt the landlords, while in East Bengal, where popular dynamics were different, the hated permanent settlement of 1793, which fixed the level of revenue to be raised from the land, enormously in favor of the British colonizers, was abolished in 1951. Pakistan's founders thus set the country two ambitious goals. One was the accumulation of sufficient military strength to impose a balance of power in South Asia on a far larger adversary, India. The other was to sustain rapid economic growth with the objective of achieving industrialization. In institutional terms, these goals required the strengthening of the military, the civilian bureaucracy, and creating a new business and industrial elite. Materially, however, it was clear that Pakistan did not have the resources to simultaneously engage in military competition with India and make the necessary investments in industrialization. This meant that Pakistan would need external support, and in the context of the emerging Cold War between the USA and the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, USSR, in the late 1940s and early 1950s, the Western Bloc was the most promising source of military, economic, and technical assistance. Pakistan's leaders had little interest in US Cold War objectives, but had the sense to play along with the growing paranoia in Washington, D.C., and draw benefit from India's neutral foreign policy, which left Pakistan as the only valuable South Asian piece on the US side of the chessboard. Pakistan's tilt to the West would thus be a conscious product of its grand strategy vis-à-vis India, and sustained by apparently credible fears that the Indian leadership had not accepted the communal verdict of 1946-47 as final, and still held out hopes for a single Indian nation, undivided by religion, ethnicity, or caste. While embarking on this strategy, the ruling party in Pakistan, the Muslim League, faced mounting challenges to its internal cohesion. Jinnah's death in September 1948 and Liaquat Ali Khan's assassination in October 1951 removed the only two leaders of genuinely national stature from the political scene. The splintering of the Muslim League into rival factions was evident soon after Jinnah's death and reflected in Liaquat Ali Khan's tendency to equate political dissent with disloyalty to the state. The Muslim League leadership, setting aside Jinnah's advice, decided to introduce the Objectives Resolution in March 1949. This resolution spelled out that Pakistan would be a state in which all laws would be made in conformity with the Quran and the traditions of the Prophet Muhammad. It was done in order to rally support for the government on the basis of Islamic identity and marked a fundamental epistemological break from the state secularism of British India. This move also generated confusion among non-Muslims, who were about 20% of the population of East Bengal, and led many religious conservatives who had opposed the creation of Pakistan to project themselves as the authentic guardians of the Islamic ideology of the new state. In practical terms, the resolution did not speed up constitution making, and in October 1951, the Constituent Assembly was still discussing basic principles after having sat for over 4 years. The political leadership further delegitimized itself by resorting to administrative interference in the 1951 provincial elections in Punjab, where, according to official estimates, the results of 50 seats were affected in favor of the ruling party. The combination of delay in constitution making, the growing clout of the civil service and military, and dismay in state elite circles that the politicians were relying on religion to perpetuate themselves in power, and, in doing so, raising expectations that could not be reasonably fulfilled, produced a rift between the political and bureaucratic leadership. Pakistan's secretary to the Ministry of the Interior bluntly warned Premier Khawaja Nazimuddin in March 1952 that if the politicians did not stop treating the state like a personal estate while engaging in dangerous games with religious fundamentalists, Pakistan would risk degenerating into primitive conditions. The expected explosion came in March 1953 with the outbreak of sectarian violence against the Ahmadiyya Muslim community in Punjab. This led to the imposition of martial law in Lahore for 2 months, the dismissal of the Punjab government, and on the 17th of April, the ouster of the Prime Minister. The figure at the heart of these successful intrigues against Pakistan's politicians was the Governor-General, Malik Ghulam Muhammad, a former civil servant who, with the support of like-minded civilian and military officers and judges, would lay the foundations of a bureaucratic governing corporation that would rule Pakistan until March 1969.